Hey everybody, in this video we're going to talk about the 5 biggest misconceptions about living in Indianapolis, or if you're thinking about moving to Indianapolis, the 5 biggest misconceptions that you might have. And these are 5 that I hear every single year, some more than others, but I certainly do hear them consistently year over year. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, I'm Jason Compton with the Compton Home Group. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time to this channel, then make sure that you hit that subscribe button if you want to know everything there is to know about living in Indianapolis or moving to Indianapolis or any of the surrounding metro. And also tap that little bell so you're notified every time we do a new video each and every week. Now, we get reach outs from people all over the Indy metro and all over the country with all kinds of questions, and certainly questions about the misconceptions that we're going to go through here today. So if you have questions at all about any of the surrounding areas around Indianapolis or Indianapolis itself, then don't hesitate to reach out any way that you know how. We'll always have your back with those questions, and we'll certainly always have your back when it comes time for you to make your move to or within the Indy metro. So today we're going to talk about misconceptions. Every single place in the entire country has a reputation of some kind, and then it probably also has those things that people think about it, but they aren't really true. So we're going to go through 5 of those for Indianapolis, and I hear these things every single year, and as I said at the beginning, sometimes a little more on some of them than others, but the biggest one, absolute biggest, I've saved for the end, so make sure you stay tuned for that one. I hear that one constantly as the days go by each and every year. So the first big misconception is Indianapolis is a sports town. There's no question about that. There's a lot of sports to be had here. We've got the Pacers, you've got the Fever, you've got the Indians, which is the AAA baseball club for the Pittsburgh Pirates. We've got the Fuel, which is a hockey team. We've got the Indy 11, which is a soccer team. Of course, we've got the Indianapolis 500, which is the biggest sporting event in the entire world. The NCAA headquarters are here, and so you have NCAA Final Four is here, and of course some of the different Sweet 16 and different parts of the NCAA tournament, they'll be played here. It seems like every year, but it's not every single year. The Final Four is definitely not here every single year, but it's here often, and some of those other things are here quite often too. The PGA Tour, it comes here every so often to Crooked Stick Golf Club up in Carmel, where the BMW Championships have been played. Actually, the U.S. Senior Open's been there, the Women's Open has been there, the PGA Championship has been there. So it pays a visit back to this particular area every so often. We've got sports galore, plus Butler University's here, which is in the Big East, and the basketball for Butler is big. We have Indiana University, we have Purdue University really close by. You've got all the Big Ten sports, Big Ten football. It is a big, big sports town, definitely. But do you have to love sports to live in Indianapolis? And that might sound silly, but people definitely ask that because they just wonder, is that all people do in Indianapolis is watch sports or go to sports? And the answer is absolutely not. I mean, there's plenty of other things that you can actually do that have nothing to do with sports, or especially professional sports or college sports. You, of course, have youth sports, kids sports. Those are huge, but I think it's kind of huge everywhere, not just Indianapolis. So no, you don't have to be a sports fan at all to live in Indianapolis. You'll find plenty of other things to do. There are lots of cities out there with the reputation as being a sports town. You've got cities like New York, of course, Boston, Miami. I mean, have you heard of those? Those are big cities, and they have a lot of sports to offer. So Indianapolis, it's not as big a city as those places are, especially a place like New York City, but it is a big city, so it does have a lot of sports to offer. But you can push it off to the side, enjoy plenty of other things without having to love sports. Number 2, and this one is kind of one of my favorite ones, honestly. There's a quote, I think, from Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, that at least I think it's credited to him, but he said that if you don't like the weather in New England, just wait a minute. Meaning, of course, that the weather can change very fast in New England. And it seems like every place in the country, every city in the country, or at least it feels like that, a lot of places have adopted that quote for themselves. And Indiana, Indianapolis, no different. You'll hear a lot of people say, well, if you don't like the weather right now, then just wait a minute, it'll change. And, you know, we live in the Midwest. We have hot summers, we have cold winters, and we have spring is really mild and the fall is really mild. They're actually beautiful times of year. We don't have the hottest weather in the summer, but it's hot, and we don't have the coldest weather in the winter, but it is cold. And we can have days where, you know, it might be 70 degrees one day, and then the next day it doesn't crack 40 degrees. It's in the 30s. You know, especially when we get into the fall and the spring, you can have some volatile weather. We aren't the only place in the country that has that happen. I remember recently in Denver, Colorado, just as an example, you talk about volatile weather, they had, and this was back in the early fall, I think, when this happened to them, but they had one day it was 93 degrees, and then the next day, the high was 38 degrees, or very, very close to that. That is ridiculous. We don't have weather swings that extreme. I mean, that would be exceptional. But anywhere you are in the country, essentially away from the ocean tends to moderate things and make things fairly stable, so you don't get wild swings. They're more consistent. In the country, away from big bodies of water, we're prone to having bigger temperature swings when storm systems and fronts move through. So it happens here. It's not unique to us. But if you live on the coast or you live someplace where you don't get those temperature extremes, then you're going to experience that if you live here in Indianapolis. But just know it's a misconception, and that can happen in a lot of places. It can happen in Chicago, it can happen in Louisville, it can happen in Nashville, Tennessee, it can happen in St. Louis. Of course, when you get up into Minnesota and Wisconsin, places like that, absolutely. Oklahoma even, getting far enough south as that, or even into Texas. Texas can have some, especially northern Texas, can have some colder weather and of course extremely hot summers. So they can have some wild swings. We aren't unique to that. Just know that. That's not really a misconception, I guess, per se, perfectly, but it's certainly something that people here feel like it's almost unique to us, and it's not. The third misconception, and this can actually happen with people who live here or people who think they are going to be moving here or may want to move here, but they kind of need to get past this idea that Indiana or Indianapolis is boring. And if you think Indiana or Indianapolis is boring and you live here, then you just aren't paying enough attention. And if you live someplace else and you're thinking of moving here, or maybe you have to move here for your job or whatever other circumstance that you find yourself in, and you think, oh man, Indiana and Indianapolis is going to be so boring. Again, you're just going to have to pay attention because it absolutely is not boring at all. Indianapolis is, I don't care what you say, it is a big city, it is very populated, and when you include everything in Indianapolis and all the surrounding areas, there is a tremendous amount to do. You're not gonna be able to come here and do everything that you want to in one weekend or a week or even a year. Some of the things just off the top of my head that you could do just, let's say in a weekend, over the course of the year, places that you could actually visit. You've got of course, the Indianapolis Zoo. The Indianapolis Zoo is incredible. It's a zoo, it's a botanical garden, and an aquarium. You could go there multiple times and not hit all of it. Then there's Newfield, the art museum, and the Eiteljorg, and the State Museum. You've got museums galore around Indianapolis. It's an incredible place, plus all the war memorials. Incredible to visit. Indianapolis is only second to Washington, D.C. in the war memorials. And you might think, well, war memorials, what are you talking about that for entertainment? Well, you can go there, of course, to learn more about what happened in different wars, but they're typically really beautiful. They're almost parks and just some cool places to go. Plus, speaking of parks, Indianapolis has an incredible park system. It's one of the best park systems in the country. It'll sneak up on you exactly how good it really is, just by the sheer number of parks and the number of acres that those parks in total take up. Plus, that doesn't even include all of the surrounding suburbs. Some of the suburbs around Indianapolis have incredible park systems, and really pay attention to putting money and effort into those parks to ensure that the experience of living in whatever suburb you're in is a really good one. At least you have those options to be there if you need something to do or a place to go. Plus, some of the state parks in the south, especially just south of Indianapolis, they are some of the sneakiest and best in the country. The terrain there is pretty different than what a lot of people think of. As far as Indiana, I think it's just all corn and all fields. It is not. Indiana was completely woodland for the most part, not prairie, but mostly woodland long ago. So when you get to the south especially, you can see how Indiana probably looked hundreds of years ago. It's rolling, not mountainous, but extremely large hills for sure. Some of the best mountain biking and hiking that you're gonna find all over the Midwest is found right in southern Indiana. It is absolutely beautiful and not a long trip to get there from Indianapolis. Plus, the music scene here in Indianapolis is incredible. There are a huge number of music venues in the city and even outside the city. One of the biggest music venues in this area is in Noblesville, Indiana. It's right now called RUOFF Home Mortgage Music Center, or just RUOFF Music Center. It used to be called Deer Creek, and that's what everybody else around here knows it to be. You have Bankers Life Fieldhouse, you got Lucas Oil Stadium, you got the lawn at White River State Park, and just tons of other smaller venues across the city that are unbelievable. The music scene here is fantastic all year long. Plus, the food scene has exploded. If you want good food, fantastic chefs, you're not going to have to struggle to find that and have yourself something that's really super upscale or very different. You can find that all across the entire city and even into a lot of the suburbs as well. Plus, there's a ton of places for great nightlife. You've got just very simply downtown Indianapolis or Mass Ave, or even the Arts and Design District in Carmel is pretty incredible too, or Broad Ripple. Plenty of places for nightlife as well. It's not going to be New York City, of course, or even a place like Los Angeles. It's just not that big. But for a bigger city, it will suffice in the nightlife. Plus, going back to point number one, sports, we've got a ton of sports. So if you find Indiana or Indianapolis boring, then a lot of those things that I just talked about with you, they just may not be for you. So you're gonna have to find someplace else to cure your boredom. And usually what that means is mountains and beaches. And you already know we don't have mountains and beaches here. So you have to look at those other things for your entertainment, and there is plenty of it. No question about it. Now, number 4 is one that I don't hear all that often, but I've definitely heard in the past, is that Indiana, because they don't know that much about it, or Indianapolis, that everybody lives on farms, or at least most people live on farms. To say everybody lives on farms is a stretch and be almost kind of a ridiculous thing to say for any place in the country. But most people live on farms. We'll just say that, hear that a little bit more often. And that's absolutely not true. Well, Indiana certainly has a lot of farmland, but there are a lot of Midwest states that have farmland. In fact, almost every state in the entire country has farmland of some kind. It's just a matter of what crop grows best in that particular climate in that state. Here in Indiana, corn is very big, of course. Soybeans are very big, definitely. Those are probably 2 of the biggest crops, but there are other crops as well. We don't grow oranges like you would in Florida or something like that, but that is specific to us. But not everybody lives on a farm at all. It's not even close, actually. I think it's at least 70% or more of Indiana's population lives in cities or towns. They don't live out in these rural areas just on farms. So more than 70% actually live in the cities and towns. And Indiana, it's not a huge state. I think it's about 38th or so as far as the geographic area that it takes up in the country. It's ranked 38th, but it's about the 17th most populous state in the country. So fairly small, but really, when you compare it to other states, a lot of people here. So not true. It's a misconception if you think that it's all farmland, or everybody, or very close to everybody, or the majority live on farms. Now, number 5, the last one here, this is the one that I definitely hear the most, and that Indianapolis is super cheap and affordable. And that's a little bit of a misconception. So if you think that you're gonna come to Indianapolis and get a home for $100,000, $150,000, then you've been fooled for sure. If you look across the internet and you look at different sites to see what the median home sale price here is in Indianapolis, you might see $160,000 or $170,000. That may be true, but it takes into account all of those homes that are down in that $30,000, $40,000 range. And you can definitely find those homes in Indianapolis, but you can find those homes in a lot of cities. And those are homes that need a lot of work, or in addition to the fact that they are not in good areas. Indianapolis, its overall safety reputation isn't all that good, honestly. But there are plenty of places in Indianapolis that are really safe, and all the suburbs are very, very safe too. But those pockets in Indianapolis, those are the pockets where you can find the super cheap homes, but those are also the places that aren't safe. Those are the ones that give Indianapolis, for the most part, a more poor safety reputation. So if you're looking to get into a highly desirable place, a place that people want to be in the city, or if you're looking in one of the suburbs and you've got under $200,000 to spend, honestly, it's going to be a struggle for you. You're just not going to have all that much to choose from. If you've got under $300,000 to spend, you'll have more opportunities, but you're still going to be a little bit limited. In fact, if you don't have at least $300,000, then there are some suburbs for sure that you're probably not going to get into. Carmel, Zionsville, Fishers, just as examples, those are going to be places that are going to be extremely difficult to get into under $300,000. Now, with all that being said, I still do understand that that is more affordable than what you can find in a lot of other cities across the country, especially some cities on the West Coast, cities on the East Coast, and in the Deep South, like around Miami, just as an example. You can find homes here much cheaper. You can get a lot more home for your money than you can in those places. But it's not so cheap that you can just get anything you want super, super ridiculously low priced. It's not going to happen. You have to have just a little higher expectation than the general consensus seems to be across the internet about the affordability in Indianapolis. So there you go. There are 5 misconceptions about Indianapolis that I certainly hear from time to time, and like the last one, I hear really truthfully quite often. If you have any questions about any of those or anything regarding Indianapolis or the surrounding area, then make sure that you reach out. And until the next one, we'll see you later.